instruments. So, but oh, I should do an intro. That's a good intro, meta intro. So this is XORG session that is likely to contain a lot of casework, case analytics towards game structures. But currently we're at the point of general introductions and a little bit opening of how the group has become what it is now. That's enough of introduction. But does anybody else want to take on like of our current interests or our qualities?
I saw that Jakob was posting a link to a Miro board.
Mm-hmm.
That containing a current.
It might have been a bit premature, but we were speaking the last time about kind of exploring the possibility of a kind of a network or decentralized university. And so we started sketching out some initial ideas. And this is also why Jan is here, because he's interested in the topics. And so perhaps there will be, this could be like one of the cases. And yeah, I'm not sure, because sorry for missing the complete beginning, but Jan has already also been working on a kind of a idea or concept of which is close to let's say decentralized university. So if there was a space to perhaps introduce this this bit or look a bit more into the distributed university case. So yeah, that's why I shared the Miro board.
Yeah, but that's okay. I think we should kind of try to slide towards it, or at least in a kind of good time, or good time being short time. But the one practical question you just wrote, the link doesn't work for you. Is there problems with the link? Just to get that straight before we move on. Can you open this? Because it should be a public link. Okay, it seems to be open. Good. But I think like if in a very nutshell says where kind of things started, but also kind of where we are, it's about this sort of common structure and qualities between games and organizations, and how those allow us to approach organizations in a game-like manner, also to think about, say, interaction structures in an organization, take, say, voting, to take a simple example, and take an interaction structure in a game, and kind of look at them potentially even pieces in the same system or potentials for both. Because once you start looking, these two things actually come closer and closer. Like, of course, there are many games that use voting, especially if you go to role-playing or board gaming side. But well, okay, Among Us uses voting as well, so that's a recent example. And they use it actually in a similar manner than organizations. But one of the interests of this combination is that there is a huge structural palette in games. Like if you think of all the games and their history, like this little model and this little model, like if you think of how many token models there are in games, because points are kind of like tokens, games exhibit the same qualities as organizations exhibit in this world. So they have something like tokens, but they're usually called points. Like this board game has the red and the yellow and the blue, and you get the reds like this, but the blues like this, and you only get the yellows if you enter the second board, kinds of things, and then like a practical infinity of those. So what can we not just learn from this, but what does it mean design-wise? That there is this palette and it's potentially compatible to a large degree with organizational structuring. And what could that mean for future culture of design of organizations, but also paradigms of organizations? How do we think about how we organize? Can we think of that we play an organization maybe play seriously, that we're not meaning to go out of it, but because yeah, like in a way, a graphic designer is a role just as much as a fighter in a particular game, and there's an overlap there as well. And both are made out of things they can do in organization or a game. But what if you play that? Anyway, that's my side. If somebody wants to add something to the group identity, that's open.
And perhaps also mention that we are working on some tangible outputs during the sessions. So there's, I think, 2 documents emerging. One of them is, yeah, I don't want to say it because I forgot. I will jumble the name, but the shorthand is OBOC, right? Like
yeah, there is no official pronunciation anyway.
Yeah, and it means, yeah, I need to open it up because I'm still absorbing but it's operational.
It's a good memory refresher if you open
yeah. Yeah, I will share the link if that's okay.
Yeah. It's completely. I've been sharing it. Yeah, and well, I can say it's an organization by operational concepts, and it's not any kind of final name, but it was 5 minutes to come on. But it means like operational concepts is a kind of a nerdy, still unexisting term for certain game structures, which is like they're like skills in RPGs or the different models they have for those. They're kind of like concepts that they're made like concepts, like, oh, there's this kind of functionality. This is how we understand skills, but they're operational first and foremost. They are about what they can do, and there is no such term. We made it up, but I think it's maybe useful to make it up. Maybe there is a better wording for it. So organization by operational concepts, of course, kind of refers to that direction, like how you can use such concepts in organizations. What can skills, traits, moves, etc. Can mean in an organization. Scenes also, like how especially contemporary games approach scenes, which is quite interesting. But yeah, like that shareable, it's kind of mucky and dirty. But then, like Jakub, you were continuing because you mentioned only that. You were probably mentioning another document.
Yeah, there was another one. I think the earlier one, which was looking a bit more into the actual game concepts, right?
Yeah, I can dig it up.
Yeah, and there was one more kind of possible branch or kind of parallel initiative, which is that we started exploring how we could express those things within an like game, like 3D interactive game environment, which is yeah, also one of the, let's say, parallel topics that are interleaving our discussions.
Yes, that is true, and not necessarily a whole organization, but just like voting is a module for an organization that has this protocol of this is how we vote. Like, how could a game engine build a particular protocol, and how can you then use the expansive possibilities of a game engine for that? Like, what does it mean that organization to do a certain thing goes to a game environment, and what kind of games those would be? That's there. But we could kind of slide towards the like, first of all, like for everybody, what do you think about continuing from the university? I can say that even if you weren't in the last session, it's not a problem. I think we could with Jakub kind of introduce it. What's there? Is that a good case for you? Which would help us tremendously because it gives us a direction. So the one thing I wanted to do as a kind of maybe inspiratory, you can decide if it's inspiratorial or not, to share one, not, it's actually a snippet of a document of a kind of structure I've been working on, and it's towards kind of like how to enable a fully or at least 99%, 98% distributed organization. And because I think that question is quite key for university, I think it might be interesting to share some thoughts of that. It's not about that we should use them as is, but maybe there's something useful in there. So I could give try to keep it in 5 minutes or something, uh, uh, and you can stop me. But I'll just share the screen this is a prelude now. Then. Okay. As you can probably tell, this relates to EXA. If you see the screen. So this is about like building kind of EXA around EXA. You could think of it as an EXA network, which is about actually people in a distributed fashion having the sort of possibility of engage and interact with this EXA, which also can kind of create this sort of capsules of smaller operations, which then have sort of independence within it. So a unit doing this or a unit doing that. And this is towards the structuring of that. And like I said, this is just a snippet because this is the member protocol, roughly speaking. There is also an offer protocol and a node protocol and a couple of others. But I wanted to pick this because like really relating to this university. So there are these sort of like so this is now written also that people who are not coders or game designers can read it. So it's more like in normal language. But and it's also designed towards people that there's kind of structures you could code from it, but it's really about also like how would people interact with it and what does it mean for their motivation. But so I go quickly through some of these things. Like first, it thinks of a member like what kind of things a member in kind of traditional sense has, what consists a member, and also what kind of things members do for organizations, even if they don't have them, at least explicitly. And there were a couple of points here. Like first of all, like the right separate representation and commitment and make a kind of explicit statement on representation. Now, this is a model where any member can kind of invite another member, and then they have to only get acceptance from a few members to actually validify that member. So there's no board to anything in traditional sense. There's no central place. So in such things, representation might rise to be even a bigger question, but I think it's key in everything. Is my mouse showing? Doesn't really matter. I can use, but the representation is like actually explicitly talking about or defining how you can speak in the name of that organization. Which is kind of like not trying to limit when people go out there and they say, I work in EXA or I'm a member of EXA. It's not about limiting that, but kind of like building certain kind of, say, communications, but also like some kind of mental process. Because here is like, you have the right to speak in the name of EXA, which is saying like for the whole organization, but from the purview of a member, that is what you are. Your expressions are members' expressions, not expressions of EXA as a whole, even if they describe EXA as a whole. So there's not so much about EXA now, but this sort of like how one can think about this sort of like talking for something that is a distributed body. And I'm not saying this is the best way ever to do it, but it's an interesting area. I wanted to point that out because if you know, just refer back to the university. It opens up an interesting question: who can represent? And then commitment is separated because commitment, well, as one can see in the right, you have the right to commit yourself and resources in your control in the name of the organization. And then the act of commitment must be added to the EXA record. But for committing others and other resources that are essentially not in your control, you need an expression of their commitment through their participation in an offer. So what that means is like essentially there is a self-orienting or self-directing quality. Like if somebody asks you to speak for organization X, Y, and Z, you don't go to the board or, well, you make a record that everybody sees what you've done, but you have that right if you think you can speak for it. But if you're doing something that contains like a commitment from others, that's the litmus test in your head. It's like, I cannot do that. I have to think about that. And what you then turn that is an offer, which we don't go too detail here, what's the kind of offer concept, but the key part here is what you would think is, what do I need from this person or any person in the organization or anywhere really? Like, do I need graphic design or text, and how much, and so on? And that's precisely the kind of the ask, or could be the ask in the offer. So that's a way to build it into a communication. So, but because the offers, well, we can go to that later, but they are essentially kind of also distributedly activated and accepted. So this is spreading it, but not centralizing. Then the invitation to be a new member, every member has a right to invite others, but then it's also made to an offer, and if that offer is recognized by 3, is just a number, could be 3, 4, whatever, but by other members. Recognition here means that you don't go into the offer and promise something like a commitment, but you simply say, this is a good offer, and you can kind of signal that. And if it's signaled by enough members, which is quite low intentionally, that person becomes an EXA member. Then you can create these offers, which is essentially this sort of like, well, asks, kind of initiatives. They can form projects, etc. And then you can participate in the offer by recognizing it, or participating in a particular offer through the means defined by the offer itself. So the offer kind of becomes its own scope of governance, because if the offer says, like, somebody represents that, hey, there is this possibility of us getting, say, this and this kind of funding if we do this and that, or it says like we could start a new project and I think there should be this and that and I could take part in this way, but how about others take part? That is a governance. That offer in itself is an island of governance, or it's a proposition of governance. So if you can participate in that offer, say if it says anybody can join the writing group of this offer, or it can say you particular person or you certain persons can join the writing group of the offer, whatever it says. That's the governance of the offer, and you can participate in the offer by its governance. Of course, if the offer is never recognized, it's not going to be active. But then there is a further path which we won't go here, but it's about how offers turn into nodes and can turn into permanent or persistent structures. Okay, that's maybe enough because I already talked maybe probably over 5 minutes. Because the rest is kind of like a continuation of that. But I wanted to highlight this for the university cases. Maybe there's something useful in this, like, because it's kind of like trying to solve, probably not in the best way, but how many of these key questions become more towards the distributed side of structuring rather than let's take this up the board. Like who can speak for it, who can recognize a project, propose a project, etc. And it's nothing like many of these elements are completely existing already. It's maybe combining them, but yeah. So we talked a lot in the case of university about distributed possibilities. So maybe that is something helpful. I can share this actually in the Zoom, but I will, after that, I will take it off the screen. But any comments?
Can you repeat again, what does it mean to recognize an offer?
Yeah, that's a bit nerdy, but it means like there's like somebody makes an offer and it's there, but it's kind of frozen, suspended before nothing else has happened. But if, say, 3 people, which is the number right now, come and simply recognize it, which is like not committing anything and like not going in there and saying I become the graphic designer or I do, but simply like I like kind of it's almost like a structural or constructive like in a way. Then the offer becomes active or becomes like valid, I could say. Uh, and here's the idea is also like if you actually participate and you say I will do this and that for the project, you are at the same time recognizing already it. But recognition is the practical point is how do you make it easy for people to have their say to acceptance or not, without them needing to be inside the offer. So the recognition kind of serves that. And the balancing of these kind of things, that's kind of the easiest part and the hardest part. So you could put it like, you could put like recognition, rejection, and you could say if there's more recognitions than rejections, then it's accepted or whatever. That you can kind of, those are like dials. You can change those dials quite a bit. And it's also the hardest part because finding where to put the dials can change things drastically. But structurally speaking, they are not the hardest part to solve. Uh, but having this sort of main pieces is the key point here. Um, um, I can even put edit. But yeah, that's what it means. If that's clear.
So it's kind of 2 steps towards
Or 2 routes.
on a spectrum of actualization, or so you can kind of bring it to life by recognizing it first and then by actively participating in it, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah, or you can recognize it even if you don't participate. If you participate in it, you're already recognizing it.
Yeah.
But the recognition does this job that I'm not going to take part in that offer, but I like it. I think it's completely valid in this organization. I want to support its existence, even if I don't take part in it. That's just a recognition. That's what it means. Any other comments? I'll share the link in the chat. And it's a draft. It's not finished. It's a draft. Was it that bad? I'm not.
Yeah, I find this useful. At the same time, for me, it always helps if it can be related to the context which I'm more familiar with. So, for example, yeah, I mean, you mentioned examples, right? For example, if someone wants to become the graphic designer, but perhaps if we kind of illustrated some of the concepts related to the very specific, I don't know, case or context that we are familiar with, that it might also help bring it more alive or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, I think that's kind of often my problem trying to be short. I just end up being just abstract because I like the abstract things the most. They are the coolest, so I constantly talk about them. But like maybe just a short example. Let's say one decided, by the way, this whole thing is medium independent. Like the things could be in text, but they could also be in code. They could be on paper between people. Uh, like and a particular definition or protocol can be just a reference that it's this code that is the protocol. Anyway, so once again I went to abstract points, but the practical example. Let's say certain people wanted to form this sort of distributed organization about anything. And what they would have some topic, of course, in mind, and they said, okay, let's use the medium, something hacky and simple like Telegram. And let's say our offer market, which is of course not defined there, but which is the place where these offers would be, and you have to write, it's just a Telegram group or a Discord group. And the member rights would simply be in that particular case, recognizing those people into the offer market and maybe a couple of other operations. And then there is a definition of the offer, which is really about, it could be quite open, or like currently it's kind of like you have to say at least something about the output, like what comes out of the project. And then in terms of the commitments you cannot cover, you have to define them and you have to make an ask for them. Like you have to say, this needs, say, the graphic designer, and it needs, that could be anybody, or I'm asking for this person, or it's open for everybody, but I ask first this person, or whatever. So you're kind of explicating those. And of course, it can have like a normal description, like this is about this, and we want to do this, and so on. But it has a little bit of structure, and then it has this dial because you can put more structure or less structure into it. But let's say this is the Telegram group where the offers happen, and there are simply messages there, or maybe it's a Discord group and it's a little bit slightly more fancy, but nevertheless kind of similar. And then the people invited there they have the right to the offer market, so they have the right to the group, and then they can kind of sign themselves into the offer, recognizing it, or committing to it, to a slot, as I call them. This sort of like a open graphic designer is a slot. It's a definition of a potential rather than an actual, a thing that has not happened yet or is not yet existing, but is defined as potential. So people can come to that offer and activate them. They can use those to create new initiatives. Then they can, of course, have all kinds of meetings. Not everything has to be in the rules. It's the key thing that the rules are only doing, they're like this sort of vehicles or instruments for the organization. But let's say the organization having a chat about something, there doesn't necessarily have to be rules for that. But so they talk about something, and then they maybe together formulate an offer, and then invite people externally. Maybe they decide to make it to a member. But it's like how that can grow on with this sort of this direction of structuring, in a way, like doesn't have to be particularly this, but and how at no point there comes this sort of point that, okay, but who's the final deciding factor? I mean, the kind of closest to a board, what it has is that there is a structure of like a meeting where everybody can take part, where people can offer changes to the rules themselves. And then you can set the kind of percentage, whatever, of what is an acceptable level of changing these rules. But that's as close as it goes to a central power. So I don't know if that concretized it. Hopefully a little bit at least.
Yeah, this might be kind of a bit off topic, but I immediately thought, hey, this is certainly something useful, because it's also a kind of a layer that you can kind of lay out on top of kind of any situation in real world, or also like in any situation in a kind of fictive world. So immediately started thinking, hey, it would be very cool to try out this sort of like thing in massive multiplayer online games. This is because if you have a guild structure, the guild often offers you very limited set of tools to make choices. And this could kind of widen this kind of range of possibilities, and kind of also this like guild structures, they often need, because they are digital, they need kind of some kind of like solidifying kind of towards the real world or something like that, because it's real people doing this like things, for instance, let's say EVE Online, massive alliances and so on. So this is very interesting, and I think it's useful in universities structures as well.
Yeah, definitely could. Of course, it cannot like get exclusive access to the code of EVE Online itself, but like you pointed out, it can be this sort of superstructure. It's like there's the life of the guild, and then how the guild can define itself, but also define itself as a developing group. Like because the point is like if an offer happens and that forms a group that persists or keeps on living, well, then it comes a node, and I don't want to yet go to, well, how to define the nodes. That's kind of on the table, but it's kind of there is a semi full draft to it, but then like that kind of changes the organization's picture, because then if these nodes become like, oh, there's this thing where the people kind of form their own um, functioning structure, and that can have a very different decision proposal. It can even be like we decide everything by central power or by this person. If that offer is accepted and that happens, but it's still kind of, it's both related and independent, because you can think of it this way. Let's say there forms this sort of node, which is kind of like a sub-organization. This is, by the way, fractal. You can have sub-organizations to sub-organizations to sub-organizations, infinity. Um, uh, Actually, every direction this is kind of like similarly nested. But anyway, that's once again a cool abstract point. But yeah, so back to practice. So let's say that forms this. There was this offer. Let's make this kind of think tank. I'm staying in bland normal terms, and thinks about this, and it's working towards this, and but it's kind of maybe it's not accepted before it rewrites itself to be an offer that is kind of more open to everybody, and then it's accepted or recognized by the members, and then some of the people join, and it starts this think tank, and it has its own model. What it can do after, it can issue its own rights, because this is the key part, that is like object capabilities. The structure figures out almost everything about rights, but then didn't figure out this part. Then Mark Miller lists it as the limitation of object capabilities is that the programmer is the emperor. Um, but if you have structures where you start from the organization rather than a transaction, uh, the organization is always a source that can issue rights. Like um, like in a way, it's a right when a new person comes in. It's a right to make an offer, but then if you form a node from that offer, that node can offer its own rights, and they're only in the scope of that node. But they can also relate, because that one node, that think tank, could offer a right to every member in the organization beyond that node, and say, you all have the right to come to our meetings. That's a relation. It's like a line running this. So it's kind of like a blown up graph where every point is a potential infinite. Once again, abstract. Anyway, but as a background structural term, but I do think like beyond this sort of cool structural psychedelia, I think there is also some practical possibilities in that, because it's potentially very flexible. But I think I've been hogging enough time with that, probably too much, unless there's some other comments on that. But because I think maybe it proves to be useful once we look at the university, and and think about this sort of distribution or other issues, it might prove to be useful in itself. So what do you think? Should we move to the university case?
Yeah, let's do.
Yeah, I clearly talk too much. Silence is the message. Like everybody has a link. I can also share the screen just to have it visible. Um, a little bit. Should we explain a bit what we did, Jakub, last time, and what's on the board? Because it's quite big already.
Yeah, I guess that would be good because it's very raw nodes, which were kind of growing very in a chaotic way. So yeah, I guess a little bit of an intro would help.
Do you want to start? Like, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you were part of it, and I clearly talk too much anyway.
So I can try very briefly, and then
Yeah.
please you can add or correct
Sure.
some of these things. So we were at the beginning. The idea was that we could use the lens or optics of games to analyze some existing case or organization, and we picked university, and so we started here at the on the left, and it was kind of open exploration. And one of the starting points was also the question, what is actually the core values or offering of university, and how we can look at what is it that the university provides. So yeah, here we mentioned that it's a sort of a social credit in a sense, and also the function is, one of the functions is kind of the distribution of the credits. And then we also started kind of contrasting and comparing how it could be or look like in something like a distributed university, which is the column on the right, and in which ways the kind of core value might be different, for example. And we also, at some points, we contrasted and compared back into the history where there were kind of middle-aged monasteries with their own approach to kind of seeking truth or structuring the like social relations. So yeah, we were working on several fronts in the conversation, and the colors are not that yeah, they are not very formalized, but for example, if you see like a green color, like a proof or character sheet, so that was my attempt to capture like a specific sort of game element, let's say. Or if the blue ones, kind of the blue post-it notes, is where we started getting a little bit more concrete in terms of how certain rights are expressed in certain contexts. So here, for example, is a course, and kind of the scene of a course can be defined or expressed through very specific rights. And yeah, those were just like initial sketches because we didn't really explore this diligently, but it was kind of capturing of a initial free exploration. What are the pieces, values, goals, scenes of the university, and then perhaps how it can look like in a distributed university. But yeah, please feel free to add anything or yeah,
that's a good run. Maybe one thing to add is maybe some examples of why things are like they are. Like one of the things we had near the beginning was this sort of like looking at university as one of its key questions being that it's an kind of authenticated power or I think it was Pablo, or maybe it was you, Jakub, who came with what legitimacy, which is hard for Finns to pronounce, but in the sense that what really makes a university is that it has the right to say you are now you have a degree, or you have even a credit of a course. And if you start from that perspective, universities they're not only this, but they are definitely like a system that almost like percolates or branches out from that point. Like it's a point of having this power, and then everything in the structure can be seen as a way to distribute that power. Like who decides who can validify a course or make a course is kind of a pathway to validifying a course, and then in itself that it's producing this powers. I'm saying that word because it doesn't work in my mouth there. So it's issuing these powers, like you get a credit and you get a credit and you get a credit and you get a credit, but we have this whole system, so you can trust us. And this is an interesting question, because if you start the university from, say, the ground up or from the grassroots, the hardest thing for you to get is that power to say you're a valid graphic designer. So why not just give that away? Why just shove it aside? Because although I think Jakub, you brought the point that it's interesting to think of proxy strategies here. It's like that's a point of collaborations. Like, okay, we got some knowledge in some kind of recognition in the world. Maybe this university actually wants to do this one course with us, and therefore work as the credit power maker for that course, etc. But the question, like a lot of things we did after that were about how do you come to the point that that you don't start from that everything is kind of explained by the fact that you have this power of saying, okay, that person has a degree. What else can you do? And we can dive later deeper into the different approaches. I think some of them were quite good, how you could do that. But that was, I think, one this sort of practical point. There's a lot of others, but maybe at this point, anybody comments, questions?
Yeah, I mean, kind of related to what you showed before about the member in EXA, where, yeah, it kind of, the approach starts, as you already mentioned, kind of on the bottom up. So like you start from the people being there, or like the members, potential members and nodes, and all of this then makes up the organization. And has the right to speak in the name of the organization. So what the university, or most university in my view, like kind of make is this kind of thresholds that you have to climb so that you get this recognition as an ABA professor, whatever. And it just came to my mind that there was an academy in Berlin, I think in the 90s, I have to look it up if it's somewhere on the web. I think they called themselves the Academy of Sciences or something, where it was possible to get a degree. Like anyone could become part of this academy, and then would, I think, have to attend 3 seminars and give one themselves, and then they would have a degree. And this could be on anything, but they kind of hacked also the system of what is recognized as an academy and how do you get a degree there, basically. But really like coming from this participation of the members. And maybe I will find it.
Yeah, I think that you got the name right. That rings a bell. I think I visited, and there were a couple in England as well. something similar, or maybe more than a couple. But like, I think that's one way. The other thing we looked at, and I think it's maybe on this side, yeah, uh, uh, like, I know diving into this document takes time, but was that okay? If what if it's not like if the degree is actually something that might even be non-existent or kind of like the least important thing, uh, and so there is an interesting example that the side of concept artists, essentially visual artists, is one of the areas where you have already kind of distributed universities like schoolism and whatnot. Um, and I think the main reason is because the degree matters even less in that context, is because if you're going to be a concept artist for whatever, you what really matters is what kind of things you have drawn. So it's your work that matters. And then people really look at your work, and because the work is so central, it's like, oh, you can draw these kind of things, and you seem to be good with characters, or you really understand buildings and can turn like the. That's why that area has been able to spread out, because it's kind of like over that degree hurdle better than many others because of its medium. Um, but like, how could others get something similar? And we work with this idea of work as like, what if a course is not about passing the course, but the course is about, even from its starting communication, about what it enables you to produce, or craft was the word we used. Can also be self-crafting, but generally, like what it communicates is not what you learn, which is kind of an illusion often, but it's actually like what it enables you to craft. And then the point of crafting is not to pass the course, but simply craft that thing. And then what forms towards not degree, but the kind of package. A degree is not like a series of courses, but all the things you have crafted. And then it's up to you as a question as to use these things, because they're not made useless. Like a test in a university is made to be like garbage expression, because it's an expression that nobody wants to read afterwards, like all these crosses or short answers to particular questions, or even many of the essays. So it's like a garbage machine in terms of human expression. But rather, if the course is like task is to form like a meaningful crafting task, and then once you have many of those, when you go out of it, you can make a palette out of what you have crafted, and that's your main degree. That doesn't have to be the only structure, but it's a kind of slightly different paradigm towards university. And crafting here can be also kind of it certainly doesn't mean just wood carving or something. It can be like writing certain things, or being enabled to write certain kind of things, or drawing, whatever it is. Uh, um, so like I'm not saying that we got to some kind of like here's the full solution kind of point, but I think it's an interesting thought in this, that you move actually the degree to the back of the line, rather than like you don't even try to solve the degree first. You try to solve how to make a course, which is here tries to be as wide as possible term. It can be really any session, and probably it's the wrong term. It should be something wider. But the point is that what it communicates to people participating is what it enables them to do, and has to kind of explain that. Uh, and then the whole point of the course is to do something, um, even if it's thinking. Although practically you could put like expression to it, because then it kind of helps this cycle of crafting things to form this package. Anyway, that's one. You say?
I'm wondering perhaps if this would be, or this could be a good point to invite, Jan, if you want it, because it seems to me that now we are getting a bit more to like possibly how it could look like, and since I know that Jan was working, for example, on I think perhaps you mentioned it, Jan, but Jan founded a innovation laboratory within a university, which for me was very interesting kind of concept, because in a sense it's even reminding me of this kind of proxy initiative, right? Because at the start it was very much under the university, but now it's kind of branching out a little bit. And I don't want to mischaracterize it, but I was wondering perhaps if it would be useful if you wanted, Jan, if you introduced a little bit of what you've been doing and or looking towards, and it could perhaps make it a bit more grounded, what can be how this could look like in this specific context. But that's just a proposal or offer.
Yeah, sure, I can comment. Just please stop me if it's not interesting for you anymore. I am also like very talkative, so that's why I kind of like was like in the back. Well, Innovation Laboratory is exactly about crafts, about not academic learning, but about actually do something. It's very experiential. It's about like prototyping and testing with real people. So my students actually they feel the results of their work, like when they actually talk with real persons that the other part actually hates it or something. So they overcome these fears with starting anything, and they change themselves. And in one semester course, it can be done. A lot can be done, but it's very different from other courses they have. So it's very hard to actually promote it among students. Even though I had like 50 students this semester, it's still very hard to attract them, because it's a lot of work. It's not like sitting through some semester course about any know-how. It's actually building things. So I'm really into this like vocational training in the lifelong education. I found there are new structures in European Union, for example, Centers of Vocational Excellence. Maybe you can Google it. This goes with the direction I have in my mind, because I actually don't believe we can like evolve universities into this kind of stuff, because the basic principles on which these are built are very different. Like, I don't care about degrees. I don't care about courses and credits. And I don't care if it takes 3 months or 10 years. It's actually like infinite. It's lifelong. So I'm investigating actually the new principles we need to build these schools upon, so we can shape things like this. But well, most of stuff around degrees, for example, are just details, because we spent a lot of time with Jakub actually talking about what it means to have some credentials about the past. Like, okay, you built something in very specific context, it made some sense, and you have a proof that you can create something. Is it really valid, or was it just one time thing that you managed to like get from the ground and build in that specific context? So these are the credentials about past, and with need for a lot of metadata about what was actually there, so you can build some information out of it. And with Jakub, we got into a very interesting point, which is not closed, or we don't know what to do about it, about also the future, like commitment towards the future, which is maybe from the employer perspective much more relevant than something about past. Because, for example, if you crafted something in, I don't know, you programmed something, okay, but the technologies are very much different than were 10 years ago, so it's not valid anymore. But what I'm more interested in is your commitment toward the future. What do you want to learn? What do you want to achieve? What do you want to like build in the next months? But also that there is a clash with like commitment. But if you put there something like, if I don't achieve it, I will be hurt, you will not commit. It's like the difference between KPIs and OKRs, like these objectives and key results. I don't know if you know this approach towards measuring, I don't know, success in organizations.
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
But in OKRs, you are like pushed to do moonshots, and you are not. If you fail, you don't get less money or something, you know. And it's a very different mindset in these things. And this is the same. Like if you want to overcome it, but you can't be beaten if you don't get it. But well, that's when we stopped, actually. So sorry, it's a lot of mess because we are kind of like heavy into this, and I don't have answers. I just have a lot of questions how to actually make it. I have really good position inside universities. That's what Jakub said, that they allow me to do stuff like this, actually, and they support me, which is very interesting because I'm in the Center for Transfer of Science and Innovation. You know, so it's a very specific part of the university that focuses on results from the science into the market, and I'm there for students mainly. But for example, the university is really slow, but in this particular center I am, for example, the elements of AI, the online AI course you probably know, we get some Czech translation of it. And they offered me if I want to have it under the innovation laboratory, and it took me 11 days since they start conversation with me through the like I put it into the system, and I spammed the students inside the university. We have like 380 students, so it can be really fast even inside the university. But it's very, very strange thing, because usually this takes months or years. So yes, this kind of proxy I can also offer for testing anything we want, because well, it can be done. But what we're talking with Jakub is also like branching it out to different cities to actually like clone it. What we like came to. And in his city, it could be really nice to actually start some kind of clone of the innovation laboratory or similar activities, because there is no university. So it will be very different environment. And this test, I really want to test this. So.
Yeah, like I don't think like there is really disagreement. Like for example, this sort of, I don't think these thoughts or these structurings were made to really even try to somehow contest the universities as they are. But it's more like almost like if university was a game, what if you offered it as a game? What kind of elements you would build it out of? And then it's at maybe at its most aggressive, it's parasite. And it's parasite maybe for the concept. And it might be interesting to name it university, not that it has to be named university, but it might be interesting in the sense of like making people think that, okay, university could be like this. Also, like this was not certainly like, oh, we invented this crafting, because like you said, there's all kinds of hack labs and whatnot who start from kind of crafting like principles. So it's not something like, but the reason why we brought it here, because it's a good approach, as you kind of describe in itself, and then like in terms of copying, etc., copying structures, I think it's an interesting possibility to think like games have a very natural, flexible quality of copying themselves. Like you make a board game, and maybe it's just rules. it's some simple board game, and you have like the PDF with the printable page of the board and whatever. And then suddenly people start playing it in Japan, and you don't know about it even. But it just happens. It's normal, natural, and not that it's some kind of magical medicine that let's just use this model, but I think it has a lot of learnings because it naturally does this copying to every place, and that might be interesting. That you, I think one reason why it can do it is because it thinks that it's giving game rules, but beyond those and even kind of breaking those is kind of up to the others. The rules are really just there for them to have some kind of an idea of a direction, which they might find interesting, and the rest is up to them. And that kind of makes it kind of more robust towards copying. The final point towards the future, just as a starting point, because I think goal structures, like in a larger sense of a concept of a goal, there's a lot of writing in games, even in the kind of recent books about, like some people actually want to make the goal as kind of inherent quality of the game, like that. Um, some people say that, like like you get a board game and then there are these green cardboard pieces and red cardboard pieces, but they don't mean anything. But they start to mean something when there is a goal, and then suddenly this the value of those green pieces and red pieces matter when they're on the board, and then there is this goal, and so that kind of chains down like in it, like connect through these connections like energy. Um, I wouldn't go as far as that everything is about this goal, but I do think it's an interesting structure, and maybe I'm not sure about this. This is just a sketchy idea, but maybe there's something there in this kind of approaches to use in terms of the future, in a different kind of way. Of course, like goals can still be moonshots and create similar problems, but but there are many games where goals are dynamic and keep on changing, and can even be generated by the players. And how could those be maybe used for future? I don't know yet, but I think it's like an instrument family that might provide some help towards this.
Yeah, maybe I add some concept I'm really thinking a lot right now, which is take competence models for various roles in life. For example, being a change maker or innovator or whatever. And but usually these models, if you see something like entrepreneur competence framework from European Union, you will just like die by reading this. This is too complicated to actually use. But in role-playing games, for example, you have really nice user interfaces for like skills for things like this. And just I think just by like presenting it in a different way, you can do a lot. And then if you like make good like skill, not points, but it will be like something bigger, some changes in you, some delta activities, then you have these kind of like small goals in your adaptive learning path or whatever, and you can choose, okay, I want to be better at this, and I will know that I'm there because of it will look like this, and you will just make it your goal and move toward that, and just like create your own school in order to achieve that. That means connecting with other students that have the similar goals and stuff like this, and you have the supportive environment probably at some kind of place like our laboratory or somewhere else.
Yeah, I was thinking actually to show you something towards this direction. By the way, are you still seeing the mirror board on the screen? Okay, yes. So I'm just figuring out how this works, and then secondly, I want to move this bar, and yeah, but we can keep on processing. I'll do it in the background. But what I'm looking at is like when you go to uh, from like what is like role playing in computers, even in the MMO world, almost well, essentially everything is taken from from the paper, some paper, pen and paper realm. Like, well, some from the LARP, live role-playing realm, but all the paradigms, all the XP points, gamification is really like all the concepts were developed in the 70s when people tried to figure out what the fuck to do with Dungeons and Dragons because it didn't work in the beginning. There's a good book about this, by the way, which I'm going to try to dig out. But anyway, like but what I find interesting, and which is why I'm looking for this documents, meanwhile, is that there's also been progress which hasn't been incorporated from the pen and paper world to the computer world, or like the last 10 years or maybe 15-ish has kind of developed maybe new paradigms and new approaches. And some of those are rather interesting in terms of like, yes, they can still be skills, but actually how you approach skills. Like, yeah, like, let me see, where do I have it? But there are like, for example, there are some games that define something like the game master or a player as a kind of set of rules, but the rules are sort of different than what your normal sense. They're not strict. They're more like a charter would be for a company. It's like charters are often almost like complementary documents. Like they list this sort of, these are the things that we're focusing on. But then they can have functional relations by saying, okay, you just made a new initiative. Let's check it against the charter. And how much is it actually reproducing this? And this can be then a discussion or whatever. But that becomes, then the charter becomes a little bit formalized contemplation. It's contemplation plus this formality, etc. And what you can do with these kind of approaches that you said, kind of certain rules that work more like okay, you should start your interpretation from here, then it's still your interpretation, but then when we find that it bleeds over, it becomes too wishy-washy, we set certain rules of like checking them and so on. And this is kind of also goes to this sort of operative conceptuality kind of range. But yeah, let me, I'll have to, let me just stop and share the screen again on the other. So, okay, can I, yes, I can make this 2-page, but it fucks it up unless I do this. Like here we are. Okay, so this is a game we used as an example earlier, which is a game called Wonder Home, which is kind of semi-published. It's from the kind of a draft version, or maybe you could call it beta. Actually, it's quite far along, but came some months ago. But here you have this basic game engine, social engine, that there are tokens in the game. And then there is this very simple definition. You get a token, and then there's this list. Like, now this is in fantasy world, but I'm thinking about the structure here. Like you get a token, and then there is a definition. And then you can always claim this definition and people can ask about it or kind of challenge that. But basically you're here listing a kind of social quality that you want to reward for. And then spend a token is another, just a list. It's these two bullet point lists, and that's really it. There's not much else, plus some pre-description in the paragraph. But and of course the spending is something that you want to see in the organization, but it's like a limited resource. And then it creates this sort of back and forth of like, oh, I want to do these things that spend a token, therefore I do certain things to get a token. Now, this is not here, or I'm not trying to show this because it's some kind of miracle structure, but what I find interesting here, it's super simple. And yet at the same time, it's like if you compare it to how an organization defines itself in a ledger, this is just as much organizational definition, but it's a step towards formality or having some structuring in a way, maybe 2 steps. And of course, it doesn't have to be this kind of tokens. This is just an example. But it's these kind of things can be interesting more, both for the human realm, but of course you can create those bullet points in a harder sense, and some of them can be even codable things down to the what happens or automatic actions. It's even allows for mixing and matching. So I think these kind of directions are interesting in terms of when one starts thinking of, well, competency, but also like the range of actions in a way. Competency is really a quality to express a range of actions, probably an expansion for that person, but it's still about the range of actions that they can do.
Yeah. And perhaps it also kind of brings for me another level that can be that might be important at some point, is that if this kind of let's say stem cell of the organization gets replicated somewhere, there also will come the question of the economy, right? How it interfaces with resource allocation within the wider environment. I think you mentioned the last time, Pekko, that it's it can be seen kind of as taking the organization block and looking into it as a game in wider wider ecosystem. And then here also for me, what is very interesting is now we are looking, or we have been looking in a sense when introducing tokens. So it's kind of like economics, and the tokens can be a part of it, but then like finding the possible interfaces with like the larger economics and kind of looking at it also in the game lens. And then for me, the last thing, which is like big question still, is when defining the purpose of such organization or the education, then and kind of obtaining the skills or actionabilities. So I saw some courses which were trying to prepare young people to be more, I don't know, autonomous and whatever, but still in the end, most of them, a lot of them kind of ended up in corporates, like working for the beast in a sense. And then so what is interesting for me is kind of how this can help bootstrapping more commons-based economies, which are not that dependent, for example, on the market or on the financial system. But yeah, anyways, I'm veering off, but just wanted to kind of mention that this bigger frame is very interesting, I guess, for me also.
Yeah, it's an interesting horizon. I like. Any comments there, Mikael, so far?
Oh yeah, just to add a few comments, maybe on that like crafting type of approach that we were talking about the last time. I just like started thinking that we were talking about like okay, in games, if you have inventory, and then you perhaps you take materials out of the inventory, and then you experiment with those materials. Then again, we talked about that, okay, inventory could be maybe portfolio. It could also like represent your kind of potential or something like that. But okay, you and your inventory, you are located inside the university. And actually university, it has a very wide inventory in itself. And as I understand, university is kind of capable of lending you its resources, or you can lend the resources from the university's inventory. And that is kind of one job, one task the university has. And this is like also a matter of like resource allocation. We have this and this many teachers. How many teachers will take part in this course? Okay, we kind of lend these to be used by personal inventories in order to be crafting something. And then the other thing I just started thinking about was like, in many games, you have this sort of like, when you do crafting, you first have to learn the recipe for crafting something. So in those games, it may be more about like finding the recipe. And of course, after that, maybe you have a new skill tree, and then you can start like learning and mastering. But first, you need to kind of discover the recipe or the formula or so on. And this like, or blueprint maybe, like in Eve I mentioned earlier, and so on. And okay, maybe you also have to like copy and manufacture these blueprints, because they might be limited, and maybe like, so you have only like 100 attempts in when you do 1 credit worth of course worth of 1 credit, you have maybe 27 hours you can use. And then like, okay, this is actually a limited situation. You have a kind of approximately 27 hours to be used, says the kind of official something curricula or so on. And so kind of, maybe also taking a look about like how to experiment with materials or otherwise be able to find these new recipes in order to craft something. Just loose ideas, but something I wanted to bring about.
Actually, there is an idea that came to my mind from your inventories and university being a large inventory. And this might be maybe an interesting way to approach the game of a university, or offering a university as even as game rules or something to that direction. And that is like, there is a particular power which we haven't really touched upon here, but it's quite flexible and powerful. And that is like so let's start from practical. Like there is a game of chess in some place, and then 2 people start to play that chess game. That is a kind of a pocket universe in one sense, because these 2 people have the rights to move the pieces per the rules, different pieces, of course. But then, and that reality can do, it can have its very own rules. It can, well, it can even collapse if somebody kind of breaks the rules and kind of throws away the pieces and so on. But nothing is really destroyed. But on the other hand, yes, it's a pocket universe, but it also connects, because the players are not inside the pocket universe. They are connecting to the pocket universe. It's also real from the connection of those players. It taps into the world outside of it. But so if we think of this, like if I turn it into a practical example, I think games offer this interesting possibility of, okay, there is this interesting form. What if we create a reality, because games move fluidly, or can move fluidly, between kind of fiction and reality and anything in between, that we form this pocket where we put this kind of behavioral rules, and then it exists for only these 10 people, and then there is a rule that after 10 days they evaluate and they might change it or collapse it or whatever. But like the rules I just put could be anything. Could be like somebody else comes and sees it. It could be like it's always put off, or it has to change. Like it doesn't collapse, but it has to change. And I'm just making these sort of examples to point out this sort of flexibility in itself. Now, if we turn this to a kind of like into this context of university or schools at large or whatever one thinks, it forms this sort of rather radically flexible laboratory concept, because it introduces this sort of high level of pocketing, then realizing that the pocket is actually not necessarily even kind of responsible so much for the outside world, but it's also that the pocket can be kind of semi-fictional. It can de-attach ties to the real world, and but it can also retain some. So if in such structure, say, one wants to test some kind of structure, well, you can put all kinds of layers of what kind of limits it or how it develops. You can put all kinds of relations from the people to it, little relations or lot, weak relations or strong relations. So if one approaches this sort of like potential points of change or development as this kind of game-like pockets, it's a sort of interesting possibility of thinking how kind of widely a new interaction form could exist. Um, like a game can even say, like, this is a little bit wider than traditional game, is that it actually exists for a week and then it produces output like this and this, and then it leaves it there, and maybe nothing happens to it, or maybe it's interesting and that's taken up, but that's not even kind of the responsibility of the game. Like, yeah, these are just examples, but they come from the structural flexibility.
Just a short, it reminded me when we were speaking about those kind of pockets with an output, that this optics or this framework can actually help perceive, like, for example, there's hackathons, right? Which are for like 2 days. They have some kind of goals, some output, some resources, some place. But then also other people started experimenting with hackalongs, which are kind of longer term, place-based or not place-based. And then now those are like different game structures or game forms,
Yes,
which can in some way be played within or kind of connected to this distributed university. So I like the fact that this can help unify the language, how to speak about those different forms of participation or creation or learning,
Yeah, and it's also like in a game, like even if you go to a hackathon, you're kind of yourself. Of course, you get a slightly different role in the sense of, well, it's a hackathon, and then I go to a group, and that is a modification to you. But in games, it can be quite radical that, like, okay, there is this pocket, which is actually this room or whatever, and there actually whoever is the leader is, I don't know, thrown randomly, selected by whoever hasn't been, like, or it goes in a round, whatever the rule is. But you have this sort of like freedom in the sense of like defining the person as a different one. Yeah, before you go, do you have anything? I'll try to steal last comments from you.
Yeah, I think like one thing that really interested me was this idea of credits versus tokens, maybe, or what it allows, what's the craftability, and also what's the relationality of it. So in that sense, like connected to the game that you showed, also like how could maybe like how could university work also credits or tokens or however you want to call it be given to each other by the students, or like in any relation between the different roles inside of the organization. So like, for example, like if you create something or if you do a specific thing that is within the set of the actions proposed by the organization, that you get a token that can turn into a credit in a certain way. This is just like a thing that maybe as a
or something valuable, credit or really anything like also access potentially, like here
right.
like access to a certain place or what. But like if one thinks of those pockets, then one can think of the game as, okay, if that's an interesting idea, you can create a pocket for say 10 people, whatever, where they're suddenly they are in this token related, whether it goes to credit or whatever it, and then that has some conditions of its lasting. It might have actually completely changed their roles because once again, there's every one of these areas that we look kind of in games comes in this sort of sense of freedom, and then that becomes this sort of. It's very much in the concept of laboratory, but it kind of like opens that, like a socially speaking or behaviorally speaking, into a wider perspective.
I say goodbye. I'll see you on the recording and soon.
See you. See you. But yeah, what if the game actually starts from very small? What if it starts from actually this ability to create such pockets and gives tools, which is probably not a limited or like a, it's not a defined set of these are the only tools that there can be. But it kind of forms this sort of possibility of forming these pockets that can play with however fictional or real they are, and then says, well, this can form in any place, in a cafe, inside a university, in a whatever social context, but forming this, but then of course, like you can put like a thematic on a different level, like structure and thematic communicate, but they don't have to be the same. But the thematic is more the learning or crafting or however one conceptualizes it. That, but you start that it's not about creating the whole; it's giving the tools of creating the small, but it's the tools that create the unifying factor.
Yeah, and this just reminded me also that really what's exciting for me also is those concepts can be an interface towards the wider system. And when I mentioned, for example, you mentioned the coffee within university. So suddenly the token or whatever it is can, or access rights can get wider meaning within the ecosystem. And that's why also I loved, again, like the concept of commons, because it seems to me that in some places they are kind of trying to build the interface with existing institutions. So for example, municipality. And if we look at the municipality also having some kind of resources or capacities, spare capacities, or a kind of an inventory, and then you can play at the interfaces, like how to actually include the part of the institution to this game. And that's what I find really exciting, because it can start already like touching the real economical resources in a way, and kind of look towards more self-sufficiency, let's say, or something like that. But
yeah.
Oh, so what if I make an offer that, okay, here is five credits for you to get, and I have these learning objectives that must be met. It's a obligatory. This must be met. But like this is more for the master's class than bachelor's. But like okay, can you propose me how this could be? How you can meet these goals from your own kind of path that you are taking towards the university or so on, and maybe that's my question.
Yeah, you can. Like that's the short answer. Like you definitely can. Like so okay, you could do an offer which is like, here's the structure that exists, that there are these tokens, they stand for this. But then you, if you come to the slot, you have the right to define this and this and this. That's the offer then, or like roughly speaking. like, and this is why offers are actually powerful, because they kind of like as a concept, because they are like social modulators, and how they modulate is, well, first of all, they make everything modular, but they always create this cross point where well, they actually potentially can create a completely different structured organization, which is neither hierarchical or flat or anything in between. Rather, they change the nature of the relation, the line of the relation, because the hierarchy versus flat is kind of like hierarchy is an order relation, and the flat is like we just flatten all the order relations. But what if that line that is the relation is the offer? The whole organization changes. Like that, like if rather than you being the boss and giving the command that now you have to do this and this design for me because I'm the boss and I do orders, that's my relation to you, and then you have orders to do on your underlings and so on. Rather, if those are all offers, what happens is that there is an expression, which is the offer, but it's very flexible because it's an expression, and then how the expression turns into active relation is by commitment. And yes, the offer sets the kind of rules, but it's the commitment that activates those rules. Like in this case, like you made this form, and then if the other commits and says, yes, I come into this with these rights, of course they could make a counter offer and kind of take your rules and modify them. And then maybe you answer that, you commit to that offer. So but it's going to this, like, it's looking at the organization from the other side, like not the like flat or mountain. It's looking at rather what is the line that creates the mountain or raises the mountain, and let's change the quality of that line of connection.
This is also interesting because then it could also be possible that hey, if you come up kind of if you can meet this like offer in a way that like kind of satisfies what needs to be satisfied, then also you get, let's say, you get 1 credit if you can kind of manage so that we get this like course, because this needs work. You need to do work in order to kind of have such amount of like autonomy in describing what is actually about, what is this course from these and these like tools and building blocks and so on. So you can be also like credited by kind of if you kind of, it could be somehow like inherent that, okay, we meet this like offer, and now we get these like initial credits that we start with, or something like that.
I mean, could be. It could also be a giant pocket that there is a rule that we get this initial tokens, and then inside of it can form other pockets. It's like a game and can always develop sub games into itself. Like, but that, I mean, it's possible to set a universal rule, but I think even the universal, you can really think that it's just a large pocket. Like it's about what it contains. That's its largeness, so to speak, which is the nature of this sort of fractalic structuring reality. But I think like that, like in this, what we're talking about now there is an kind of an extension or a possibility of extension to this sort of what if the game was really starting from this small and giving these tools of creating these pockets, but just like leaning on the flexibility of games, fiction, reality, roles actually in this wide scale, interaction completely definable. But if you add the offer to that, well, how does these pockets come alive? Well, through the offer. Is like it's actually true of normal games. They, like a chessboard on a table in a certain place is an offer, because nobody is bound to take that chess. Somebody might go and I would like to play chess, but they are looking at the chess game itself as an offer to them, or like, would I like to play chess or not, kind of question. And then they might say something to somebody else like, hey, would you like to play chess? Well, that's an offer as well. And then they say yes. So that's two commitments, and suddenly the chess becomes active. And I could go through all the games, and they follow the same rule because they offer, and they have this sort of offer logic written in, although it's not called that. But it's a good way of one good way of thinking about them. So in this sense, like if you have a structure of like creating such pockets, whatever their rules, roles, lifespans, etc. And then you have a way of engaging those pockets, which is essentially like offer. Uh, doesn't have to be anything highfalutin conceptual. It's really about expressing it in this sense, like here are the rules that exist. Here's your possibility to enter, which is once again what chess communicates. Like, okay, the rules that exist, these pieces move like this, but your possibilities to enter, you just became the white player, so you're making the first move, and you have the capacity of moving. So, and this is also why chess games issues rights. Why all nodes issues rights, because it issues rights to the chess game. You have suddenly a right which you didn't have before of moving a white piece. It might not seem much, but it's still a new right. So in this sense, like combining these two things, like what if it's about the very small, but in a wide range of creativity, and then it's about like ways to communicate them, which is about offering them, and ways to engage them, which is like committing to the offers. You could kind of create that game as like an ever evolving beta or prototype or alpha or whatever. Like you can make, like here's one model I made, or here's some tools to make model. Here's something you can consider. Here's how you can play with fiction or reality. Here's my idea to it. But that's of course not the only way to play it. It's just a way of like, it's an instrument for creating such pockets. And then somebody can use them and create these pockets, and then they can offer those pockets and others can join those pockets. So all of that is for me this sort of hypercharged laboratory kind of thinking, that in a way, like because everything is kind of on a dial controllable, it can kind of radicalize a bit the idea of a laboratory. I'm talking how culture currently commonly understands laboratory, or how arts understands laboratory, for example.
Yeah, and also there for me what is interesting that there is again the concept of a game in a game, right? Because when you have chess, then you can have those kind of chess ratings and tournaments, and suddenly there's another kind of token which is connecting the initial games or pockets into some longer term game, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, because also like the pockets can kind of issue rights outside of themselves. Or once again, like games are a good example. The players are actually outside the chess game, but it's completely normal that they kind of create this thread that goes outside of the chessboard into some person who becomes the rights holder, and then through those rights, like it's like a palette that they have. They have this suddenly like, I can move one of the white pieces, but any of the white pieces, I can move them in a certain way, but several directions. That's the palette. So but that person is outside. So in this sense, these pockets can always create outside relations, not just to persons, but maybe to other pockets as well. Like this pocket, we actually ask them to make a move for us, like create an input into us. Like we actually make them an offer and make the, I don't know, the weirdest thing you can think of in one page. And I mean, wacky example, but nevertheless, and that's our offer to this other organization, and then they do. So that's kind of like the chess player entering the game. It's the same structure. And in this sense, like this can create networks between the pockets, as much as those relations are born by the process. Yeah, sorry if I'm being abstract. I might appeal to the vaccine if I want, because it's a like a safe choice. You can always appeal that I'm confused by the vaccine. But and also sorry for my camera glitching. It has a motherboard has a structural problem. Uh, um, so it turns on and off and glitches. But I actually do see a kind of very simple game, like the game where you start by building the seed, one seed, and then you can build another seed, and then you can build a way to build a seed. Like, hey, here's my idea, like one dimension of, like kind of like a game rule, really, of using fiction and reality. But it's not like a philosophical truth. It doesn't try to be. It's just like you could use this rule to think about your pocket is, or a way to divide roles, or a certain decision mechanism. And once again, it's just on the offer. It's like, oh, I'll take that decision mechanism and put it in this game, or this pocket I'm thinking of.
I'm sorry, I will need to jump off in a bit.
I think we're kind of nearing our time, like the stretch. We're already at the stretch span of like going over, but should we summarize a bit, because we stayed now a little bit high level. I'm probably faulty to that, and it's always when you meet new people, it's always this sort of handshakey. Maybe that also affects everybody. I don't know, but I think it might be good to summarize a bit. Otherwise, things might stay too floaty. Um, uh, so, what's your sense of, like, this is for everybody? The you being yo, as a Texan said. What do you all think of potential directions from here?
I really like the kind of idea from kind of seed to what grows out of the seed, especially in terms of like creating spaces, starting from small and so on. Kind of what would be very interesting in the future is kind of how I see it is like how this can be connected, let's say, to the objectives somehow, kind of whatever they are, kind of goals, but also maybe how it can be connected to kind of resources in a way that kind of is medium specific here, or so on, but also like how it can somehow lead into some sort of like resource allocation, or learning material allocation, or something like that in a way that would best fit into this type of like medium inside a medium, and so on. Very, very promising, I think.
I mean, that is actually rather simple, like, because it actually kind of follows the same rules, or it can be. Is that so? Resources can be thought of as in a relation of an ownership, traditionally speaking. Like, we have this resource, but ownership is really just a bunch of rights, analytic gestalt of bunch of rights. Like, owning a car is actually what you can do with it. Owning a house is what you can do it, but it's slightly different. But what you can do with it is rights. And if you would actually analyze, I can do this with my car. I can loan it. I can drive it. And if I rent a car, I can drive it, but then only to Tuesday. That's a right modulator. So in a way, like, one part of the assets is just continuing the same tool, uh, creates that kind of relation. Secondly, thinking of kind of more like token-like directions, the thing about this sort of pockets, because they are nodal, they are natural issuance points. So if you can issue a right, you can definitely issue a token, because all tokens are rights. Like if you have even euros, it's actually your rights in a certain bank to do certain operations, and the euros are just carriers for those rights. What they actually kind of boil down to is the same thing again. So in this sense, like, you can use these same tools to build asset relations in terms of we have this, or we have the rights to this, and then we have this decision mechanism, game mechanism. And once we have this decision mechanism has the right to rule over this asset, for example. And now you're actually kind of already replicating the functionality that you would have, say, in a normal organization, but you have a lot of room also in flexible terms. And in terms of like pushing potential value or value units out, well, this is what you are essentially offering is rights to some function within you, because that's even what a bank does. It's really just functions within them. And ultimately, if you trace money down, even the most traditional one, that's what it does, just shuttles all the way up and down, like all the structures in a chained manner. So in this sense, like, because like if you create a token, you also have to create how it functions. Nobody else will create it for you. How you create how it functions is to actually build an organization in the widest sense of an organization. Like it can be a piece of code, but that's a protocol in a form of rules. And then once you have that protocol, that token actually can have like real existence, because then it can do something. But you have to have that part, that interaction, otherwise the token is nothing. So in this sense, um, uh, like when it comes to assets, they can be translated, and it's actually in a way enhancing to them that they are translated into this kind of language or this kind of approach.
And I would be perhaps interested in like Jan as a kind of first comer and being exposed to those concepts the first time. So yeah, just like what's Hansa, what's your sense of like or if it brings some ideas or practical even thoughts in your mind?
Yeah, I have several like notes here from Mikael's. I really like the idea of resource mining from the university. I will probably like think about it a lot in terms of how I provide value for students. So that's some of the outcomes for me. So thanks for that.
What's your general feeling? Like, I think it's always a bit awkward to kind of combine, like, speaking past each other, but like, what's your general feeling like in terms of I don't know, the session, I guess, would be a good.
Yeah, I think it just confirms that there is a lot of bubbles thinking the same stuff around the globe, and it's a good thing, because then when we test it in real life, we can like get something out of it and share again. For example, when you share the membership at the beginning, I actually like get the feeling I spent too much time already thinking about memberships, and then once it fails in real life, when actually something really bad happens, and it's not about these basic rules which are important, but about like the skills to actually facilitate the discussion with very emotional people. So it's really interesting to think about it more. And from the university perspective, you go some like similar direction as we go. So it's interesting to see it in, well, different wording. I'm really like a lot of like thinking about how to put it in practice. And so I understand it's very like premature, and we're talking about like getting into the basic principles, and it's hard. And thank you for the invitation here. It's like when we were talking a lot about EduSystem, how the newcomers actually felt. Now I am the newcomer to your group, and it's a very similar feeling how they perceived it, and it takes tremendous like amount of time to actually get involved and get your like head around the concepts they are floating. And yeah,
and it's always hard, and maybe there is a way also to do it better than probably is, like how to introduce them, but there's always like this lingo, and then they slip quite easily. But one thing I wanted to, I completely agree with you. It really comes to the point of kind of facilitating the points where, let's say, the rules break or they're uncertain or whatever it is. And this is actually something that is, yeah, now the meeting is starting, we'll have to finish this. But something that is like interesting in the RPG perspective, because they do this all the time. They set a lot of rules, but the point is not the rules are like exhaustive. But the point is that they create a common ground of that discussion of what happens when the problems appear. And that's actually the only way they can work, because there is so much fuzzy in there. But I guess, okay, we'll finish with that. And we can talk in the Telegram about next week, but I can promise for the seed model something. Like I can sketch up something and put it up and put it editable so everybody can, of course, everybody can do it as well, but I can promise at least because I think it's actually simpler than it seems. All right.
okay.
Thanks.
But hey,
and perhaps
thanks.
what I can offer would be that if we with Jan like look a bit more into what we could do in the city, or so that we can share the kind of the grounded examples or something like that for
that. Yeah, that would be great. And because that would be then a point to not be abstract and also offer something that is less abstract, because I do think there is possibilities towards that, and talk from there. Yeah.
Great. So
all
thanks
right.
again.
Thanks
Thanks for the session.
Thanks.
Bye.
I'll stop
Bye.
the recording.